or get started, rather. Okay, good morning, everyone. This is the Incarceration Prevention and Reduction Task Force Behavioral Health Committee. We're meeting here remotely at 9 a.m. on February 15th, 2022. Before we begin, I'd like to acknowledge that we're gathered on the traditional and unceded territory of the Lummi, Nooksack, Samish, and Semiahmoo people who have cared for and tended this land since time immemorial. Truth and acknowledgement are critical to building mutual respect and connection across all barriers of heritage and difference. We begin this effort to acknowledge what has been buried by honoring the truth. We pay respect to their elders, past and present. Please take a moment to consider the many legacies of violence, displacement, migration, and settlement that brings us together here today. And please join us in uncovering such truths at any and all public events. Okay, all right. Call this meeting to order. Our number 2 item here is Recovery Navigator, and that's Perry Mowry.
Good morning, folks. Perry Mowry, Human Services Supervisor with the Health Department. Just wanted to provide some information relative to the Recovery Navigator program. The Recovery Navigator program, for folks that aren't aware, was really initiated by engrossed Senate Bill 5476 that was effective on July 25, 2021. Essentially, it directed that each of the behavioral health administrative services organizations would establish a Recovery Navigator program within the community and to be involved in outreach, intake, assessments, and connection to services as appropriate. And it goes on, the Senate bill goes on to specify that each Recovery Navigator program must maintain a sufficient number of appropriately trained personnel for providing intake and referral services, conducting comprehensive assessments for SUD services, as well as intensive case management, warm handoffs to treatment and recovery services along the continuum of care. The Recovery Navigator program was set up in different counties based on the fact of whether or not a lead program, law enforcement assisted diversion, was established in the county. And folks are probably aware that our lead program combined with the GRACE program is established. And so what the arrangement is at this point is that the Recovery Navigator program will be an embedded program within the lead program. It'll consist of 2 outreach coordinators and 1 case manager at this point. And that is in the works. I think, again, folks are probably aware that there's a process going on where GRACE and LEAD are coming under county administration. And as that process is completed, our goal is the end of March. Then we'll know more about the specifics of the establishment of the Recovery Navigator program. So the components in terms of Recovery Navigator is really based on outreach and referral. It will include staff, obviously, to be able to do that. And then those staff will respond to both community referrals and then provide short-term assistance in addressing those. And then there is also within the Senate bill a prioritization of responding to law enforcement calls in the beginning stages of that contact. So that is a priority. I can share more, Dan, in terms of I have more detail, but I'm not certain for the purposes of this committee that that's going to be necessary. What else would you like?
I think that's a pretty good summary statement. Co-Chair Parker.
Thanks, Perry. It's starting to sink in. I've heard you in a couple of different forums, and I appreciate it. There's a lot of moving parts, and we're getting some new assets, right? But they're fitting into old ones, and I like how that's happening. I like that seamless integration. Beyond my comment, though, I was curious. LEAD obviously is really there for people, committing an infraction or about to commit an infraction, right? And there's that different. Now, behavioral navigator, will they be essentially charged with the exact same type of interaction, or can they serve anybody with a behavioral health challenge somewhere? Does there have to be an infraction accompanying their work at this point?
No, it's a great question, and a couple of components to that they can engage anybody, and I suspect I think that the real difference is that the lead staff are not necessarily SUD professionals, substance use disorder professionals, whereas that is a requirement in terms of the recovery navigator staff. They will be either professionals or trainees, depending, with the required supervision. But I can't imagine that within the LEAD program, the knowledgeable individuals working together, that there's not going to be, that collaborative, work and efforts. And so I suspect that referrals may come obviously from LEAD staff, and then more specific work and coordination and et cetera will happen with the recovery navigators.
So we could think of this as a layperson, we could think of this a bit as maybe a pathway to what Michael Smith's group does at Lake Whatcom Treatment Center, right? If we've got somebody that's out on the streets that's really struggling, needs co-occurring disorder treatment, the fact that there's an SUD professional on that team could facilitate that type of recovery movement. Would you say that's right, Perry?
Absolutely, and including even pulling existing, given appropriate releases of information, pulling existing assessments that have been completed, updating those assessments, completing initial plans, et cetera. One of the things that I do want to make clear is that the Recovery Navigator program is voluntary. That is, that an individual can't be compelled to do that. So a lot of motivational interviewing and interaction, continued contact with individuals that may not at that point in time be open to receiving any kind of services that the recovery navigators would implement. They would maintain contact with that individual through outreach, et cetera. And so it certainly can come from law enforcement specifically, but I suspect that it will come from a number of different arrays, and then those relationships with existing providers such as Lake Whatcom, or beyond that, connecting those individuals directly and then supporting them in their involvement in that process.
That's outstanding. And then I know Brian Estes has a question. So just anything that you can touch on with this in terms of peer navigators. Is that a future state? Is that a possibility? Or is that something that you all don't see really as fitting with the behavioral health navigator program?
Sure. I think the peer navigator, the peer program itself is really phenomenal. It utilizes individuals with lived experience. There is some training components to that and so forth. And certainly considering our, gap in terms of professionals that are out there, it makes a lot of sense. One of the things that I've expressed before and will continue to is that the tendency towards utilizing individuals with maybe less education, that sort of formal process, I'm always interested in, and certainly have experienced in my past career, supporting those individuals with a very strong clinical supervisor or a supervisory stance, because it's a high stress situation. It can be very challenging in terms of boundaries and relationships and those kind of components. And so that's going to be an extraordinarily important component, but we are interested in that. There's a number of legislations that are out there relative to supporting that process of peers. And so utilization of that is very much on our mind.
Okay, Mike, does that answer your question? Okay, I saw Brian and then Arlene.
I apologize, I'm relatively new here, but I just wondered, Perry, if you could kind of clarify the organizational home of a number of these programs very briefly, GRACE and LEAD, and the role of the prosecutor's office related to this recovery navigator. I think I know the answer to that, but I'm not sure.
Sure. Just a general description, GRACE is a program that has been established to really identify individuals.
I'm sorry, I know what they are, but where do they reside? Is this all within the county, within your department, or?
Sure, sorry. So a bit of clarification. Up to this point in time, GRACE has actually been administered through contract through CMAR. And that has gone on, boy, I don't know if I can reach back quite far enough. 2018, I may be going back a little bit far, and has been a part of an administration with CMAR up to this point in time. And so one of the things that is happening just recently is discussions with CMAR, and I'm really taking a look at the structure and the continued expansion and development of both GRACE and I'll touch on LEAD, was the consideration for moving that group under county administration for any number of reasons. One of them being that GRACE and LEAD as a component of that are a hub to identify individuals and then get them connected to the spokes, that being the behavioral health providers that are in the community. And so through a number of steps and processes, what is in place at this point in time is moving GRACE and LEAD under county administration. Our goal with that is to complete that by the 31st of March. Additionally, the challenge in workforce gap and so forth, one of the components of that is really meeting the being able to support compensation for those individuals and maintain consistency in terms of the employment and so forth. So that was a couple of the pieces of that. The LEAD program was actually initiated through a couple of grants in the prosecutor's office. They're obviously fairly closely involved because they really identify those low-level crimes that individuals can be diverted from. And so real close work with continued work closely with the prosecutor's office in regard to those grants, and then continuing that those resources in terms of ongoing process for the LEAD program. And so since it was set up, as I had made reference to, one of the things that was allowed within the legislation was to, it made sense to embed the Recovery Navigator program in the LEAD program, because they do, as Mr. Parker had made reference, make very, very similar contacts and interactions with individuals. And then if an individual doesn't happen to fit for substance use disorder issues, then still the individual can be connected to resources through whether that's, the GRACE or the LEAD program.
So just to clarify, you say it's going to shift over to county administration, but where specifically?
Within county administration, at this point in time, a new division is actually being developed within the health department, response systems division. There had recently been processes of interviews and et cetera. Melora Christensen applied for and was offered the position of manager for the new division within the health department, working closely with the human services division. That's where a lot of the activity, including myself, have worked in up to this point in time. The human services division consists of housing homeless, developmental disability work, veterans work, as well as the mental health court. And so now what's happening is that new division is really taking a look at response systems and the components of that to ensure that that group is housed in the same location, able to support each other. But I can't imagine that close work with obviously the others in veterans or housing homeless, et cetera, would not work closely with that new division as well. So that position of manager has been filled at this point, and the next step in terms of the development of the response systems division is placement of the staff that are currently existing in GRACE and LEAD, and establishing that, of course, the job descriptions and the other components of that, and that process is in play at this point.
Thank you. I apologize for taking up time, but I just helpful for me to kind
Not
of
at all.
put some of this together. Thank you.
A lot of moving pictures, as Mr. Parker had made reference.
Yeah, Brian, we've got other new folks here too. So I think that it's a good thing for all of us to just kind of know about that and just get refreshed on it. Arlene Feld. You're on mute.
This is a very big step in the progress of expansion of behavioral health care. So I just want to acknowledge that to me, it's very hopeful and exciting that the state is recognizing the importance of filling one of our really large gaps in behavioral health services. This is very significant. It has to do with the cycling of mental health problems and SUD problems, and an attempt to cut into that and support people's recovery and emotional stability. So this is tremendously and really valuable and important. And I had a question about Melora. What was her job before she took this job?
Melora was actually the manager for the GRACE team, and has done that for, again, I'm guessing in terms of history, the last 3 or 4 years. She was a housing manager with, and it's escaping me the location she was at. I know you know, Mike.
Francis
Catholic
Place.
Community Services. She ran Francis Place from when it opened in 2015. We were co-workers there, and then she graduated from there. And then when Grace was started, she was the first program manager at CMAR.
Sounds like a great background for this job.
We're fortunate to have her.
Yeah, and if you could translate the term response systems into ordinary people's talk, what would you say?
Sure. It hasn't been finalized in totality beyond the response system components has not been, finalized at this point. So at the risk of getting myself in trouble, I'll offer the discussions. We know, as I had shared with you, that Grace and Lead would be a component of that. And what we're looking at is other aspects of services that are either supported and or a part of direct services with the health department in the Human Services Division. And so it would include, I believe, mental health court, which is a service that's actually provided through the health department. Robin Willens is the mental health court program manager. It would also likely, obviously, include the Recovery Navigator program. And then other aspects that we're also looking at is as it develops the alternative response team, that hasn't been fully defined in terms of what that team will look like and who will be involved in it, but it makes sense for that that group and component to be underneath that. There has also been discussion. There was a RFP released by the Behavioral Health Administrative Services Organization for co-responder funds through they have crisis response funds there. And so the possibility of co-responders also existing, and those are co-responders that would be related to the sheriff's office. And writing with, the goal is, the writing with the behavioral health deputies. And there may also be other components of that, but the concept, of course, is close proximity and interaction with those different staff, as they are all diversion oriented. And we didn't want to say crisis response necessarily specifically, but obviously mobile crisis outreach team, which is Compass Health, and John Dukes is the manager of that program, already works very closely with Grace and Lead, and would certainly be an integral component, not that they would be moving under, county administration as much as close a collaboration, which Mr. Dukes has certainly endeavored to do with our designated crisis responders that are a part obviously the MCOT team. So I don't know that that is the totality of what would exist in response systems, but gives you an idea, in regard to that. It would also include the behavioral health component of the human services team, which is myself and Jackie Mitchell. And so that is being looked at, and we, do any number of things, including administration of contracts within the community for a variety of providers. And so again, the concept and idea being real close work with the other responders that are involved in that system. Hope that helps in terms of a definition.
Yes, thank you. Thank you.
You bet. Crisis response or crisis stabilization center is something that I work very closely with. And so that involvement in terms of, I look at myself as predominantly a liaison, but between the providers and obviously law enforcement and other first responders. And so that's part of what would be connected underneath that as well.
Mike Parker.
Yeah, thanks, Dan. Perry, thank you for that. And I know we're really peppering you, so really appreciate the information and the news. This might be to you, this might be to Erica Lautenbach, but I think from a standpoint of the Behavioral Health Committee and Incarceration Task Force, we're going to be really interested in do these great plans work, right? So I think we've been lobbying for a long time. Many people in the behavioral health arena, and along with our law enforcement, has been lobbying for getting the help that people need so we don't have to arrest them and put them in jail. But I think in order to, and I guess my question or my line of thinking right now is really about data and evaluation. And it's really about the task force and how we might get information that helps us evaluate, did our recommendations of adding behavioral health workers, did that really assist deputies in the work that they do? Did it allow our community to have a response for people so that we don't have people in crisis / maybe illegal activity, not being approached? And so a little high level at this point, I think, but I'm really interested in data evaluation. Maybe if there are program reports at the very minimum that are established in this new division based on the inner workings, I think that would be really valuable for the task force to get in terms of, so we know how well those things function. And I think also, Perry and others, we could also then be somewhat useful in gaps. So I would also like to hear what's maybe not on the reports is what do we need it to do? I know that's been really useful in Crisis Stabilization Center, right? We knew what it was supposed to do. Teasing out the gaps and the issues just makes it stronger. So I would like to hear too from law enforcement side, as these new behavioral health resources are coming online, how well do they work? How well do they work together? Are they functional? Are there changes that we might suggest from either law enforcement or behavioral health? So Perry, I don't know what that looks like or how we might reach out as the IPRTF to the health department. But I think just being in that, even if that's that sidecar of an evaluator, I think would be really helpful.
Yeah, it's a great point, and data drives decisions. I'm certainly in support of that, and also understanding, why there may be gaps or the successes. We oftentimes will, be drawn and oriented towards challenges and problems that are there. I'm also an advocate of dissecting successes so that we can, further that process. So at this point, each of the programs, I'm sure that folks have probably, or many of the folks have seen some of the reports that Melora has provided relative to the successes of GRACE. LEAD is also tracked very closely just in terms of the number of contacts and, and those individuals, as well as some of the other components. And although this is outside my pay grade, what I would say, and I've been thinking about this some, is I think that Melora Christensen should definitely be included in the task force in some manner, not for me to decide how that occurs, but folks are probably aware that, my involvement at the level that I'm involved anyway has really been as a process of Ann Deacon's retirement. As a manager of the Human Services Division, we now have a new manager for the Human Services Division, which is more oriented towards housing homeless, developmental disability, and veterans, as I had mentioned. That is Ann Beck. She was my counterpart as a supervisor within the Human Services Division. And then, as I mentioned, Melora, which will be the response systems manager. So engaging Melora in the task force, I think, is going to be extremely important. And I know that she's oriented towards data, being able to provide that information to the community and the task force as well. I think it's going to be extremely important. I know that she is, framing that up to be able to provide that information and get feedback in all of the components. Whether that'll be done in a collective way or not, I'm not honestly certain, because there are a number of different components, but maybe a consistent way of gathering and then reporting that data so that it's consumable at a level that's consumable. So I really agree with that. And I think that that's certainly a thought process that is occurring. We have a larger component in the health department in terms of groups of folks that are gathering data and looking at how to provide that basically to the community in a consumable way that that makes sense for individuals that may not be as heavily involved in it as as we are. And so making that usable information and then posting that on the Whatcom County website as well.
Brian Estes.
Yeah, I just echo that, the need for evaluation, and especially if it can be more outcome oriented, because it's good to count a lot of stuff, but what does it really mean? And LEAD has been around for a long time, and there's been a number of fairly sophisticated evaluation studies around the country related to that. So I would just throw out that might be an umbrella to look at some of those. And I mean, it would ultimately probably require some kind of a contract with somebody to do that, to do it in a very more sophisticated way. And also, didn't they back in do something called SAM, SHA? It's sort of like comprehensive look. Are you familiar with that? Might have been like in 2015. I don't know if this committee was involved with that, but it's sort of a crisis response, a more comprehensive view of the entire system. I'm not that Kim Souter from NAMI Whatcom brought that up, and kind of.
I'm not familiar with that specifically, but I certainly agree that having a comprehensive way of providing this information, obviously, or maybe I shouldn't say it that way, one of the components of the Recovery Navigator program is also reporting very specific outcomes as well. I didn't go into that detail necessarily, but a part of the funding was also attached to, all obviously reporting number of individuals contacted, number of individuals that are engaged in services, those kinds of components.
Kelly.
Yeah, good morning, team. Mike Kelly, EMS manager, and appreciate you bringing that up, Mike Parker. So a lot of you may know that Jeremy Morton has done pretty much all of this sort of data connection network building over the last 18 months or so out of our office. But we are getting to a point where we're seeing more and more organizations that are going to need to collaborate in this information gathering. And so we probably should think about moving forward to further developing this community information hub or health information exchange hub for exactly the reasons that you mentioned, which is all this data, because it's coming in from multiple organizations now. Jeremy's done a really good job connecting all that, bringing that in gelada and getting some foundation in there. But as we move forward with more organizations participating, it's going to get way more complicated. Before the pandemic started, the health department employs a health informatics team. Jeremy Morton was starting to become part of that, but of course the pandemic just sort of blew all that up. So it might be an opportunity to put a team together that can bring all these organizations or stakeholders in to build these collaborations. And the most sticky part of all this is building those data sharing agreements between organizations to get that data input pulled into all these systems. And so there's a lot of building to go, but I would submit that, especially for the work that Jeremy Morton's done, the value of this activity has paid off exponentially, because it's gotten us to where we are now with combining this information and understanding it and being able to get into to the long arm system and to get into the corrections data combine that with EMS data, et cetera. We need to build these systems out a little bit more. And I'm just not sure. Well, I can tell you for sure, Jeremy's bandwidth, whose focus is emergency medical services, is sort of exceeding that. And while he loves being part of that, we definitely need to build this out some more and take some of that stress off of his office.
Okay, any other questions or comments pursuant to this item? Okay, seeing none, I guess we can move on to our next item. Item 3 is Public Health, Safety, and Justice Needs Assessment. And this is an update from the co-chairs. It's a role of Behavioral Health Committee, Behavioral Health Inventory and Gap Analysis, and expanding the length of committee to include discussion time with SAC members. SAC members are Stakeholder Advisory Committee, and that is the group that is going to be or already is working on discussing what the jail facility and attendant programming will look like for a ballot measure for November of next year. Jill, am I getting most of that right?
Yes, that sounds good.
Okay.
Dan,
Mike, did you have any thoughts?
Yeah, I was just going to contribute a little bit, Dan, if you don't mind.
Yeah, go for
So
it.
just to tack on what Dan is saying and how that might look to you all, the Behavioral Health Subcommittee is, and Stephen, please jump in if I say anything off. Stephen's on the SAC committee. One of the thoughts is that over the time, with the addition of members that bring their own skills, knowledge, and information, but also the presentations that we receive we recognize we've developed some skill and acumen in this area. And what we heard at the steering committee is that for a lot of the stakeholder advisory folks who've just come on and haven't been steeped in this for years and may not have the benefit of having a lot of the information that we do. It was brought up on steering that these folks could come, we could invite them to our behavioral health committee. So what may happen is we may have people taking us up on that, specifically this committee, because we do a lot of work in Sequential Intercept. We talk a lot about the programs and with specifically on how they'll reduce incarceration, how they'll partner with law enforcement, right, to do the work that we need them to do. And these are really nuanced discussions. And, obviously people can watch old footage, but the thought was for SAC members to have available to them committees such as ours, where they could be fly on the wall and listen and participate. So Dan and I just want to just kind of, we were asked this and we think this is a really good idea. More the merrier. It does make for a larger meeting should they start attending. And there's an opportunity as well for, one-on-one orientation. But part of that is just kind of some of that skills transfer. So obviously we'll give you guys a heads up if we've got guests coming or we know that we're coming, but that's certainly that invite has been made. And Stephen and Dan, was there anything else really salient that I know Dan's going to talk about Sequential Intercept, and that's one of our big tasks, but what other pieces didn't I?
Stephen?
No, Mike, that was a very good summary of the options and the importance of passing along some of the acquired knowledge this group has to some people without the kind of background that we've all developed together. There's time pressure on this, and so the individual consultations might be important as well. You might have people reaching out to you for your special area, but we need to get a lot of people up to speed pretty quickly.
Yeah, I'll comment too. I have concerns about this in terms of getting that's I think a 35 member group, and there's a whole range of knowledge base on that group, and I don't know how we're going to compress. How long have we been doing this? 8 years now? Am I right? So compressing 8 years worth of information into basically a year and a few months before it has to get on in front of the voters. It has to go through a process of the county council saying that, yeah, we're going to put this in front of voters. That can happen. That has to happen by August of next year. Ideally, it would happen much earlier so a campaign can be put together. The content of coming to an agreement on what the content of what I may regard as like a campus, a jail facility campus for correction. I don't think corrections is the right word, because I don't think corrections comes into play at a county jail, maybe treatment does, how that all is going to work. And behavioral health is at the center of what the feedback that was received from the listening tours that were conducted by members of the county council and other stakeholders after the initiative was not successful the second time. And so, so having those components of behavioral health, which would include mental health, illness, and substance use disorder service provision, how that's going to get coalesced and decided upon, and then out in front of voters in a very compressed, as Stephen mentioned, amount of time is very unclear to me at this point. So one tactic or one tool that was decided upon was that members had the opportunity to sit in with us and have those conversations, not just simply watch footage from before, but to have interactive discussion with us as knowledge-based people to further what their understanding, basically. So that's sort of the strategy. I don't know if it's going to be successful. It's kind of what we came up with. I'm also looking for ideas, and I'm all ears on if you have other ideas. I think Stephen brought up having individual consultations with people. I think being prepared to do that if this is a priority for you in terms of having a new facility coming online at some point in the future, then please do have those. I'm very concerned about the booking restrictions that are in the jail right now. I had a coworker assaulted. I work at my company does sales for a small hotel group here in Bellingham local, and a coworker was assaulted, punched in the mouth by a stranger for no apparent reason. And that assaulter was not arrested because there's no room in the jail. So I'm concerned about public safety and what appears to be a degrading downtown. We're losing businesses for various reasons, and there's a whole host of things that are happening as a result of public safety. So I urge folks to be really thoughtful and considerate when it comes to what we're forming here in terms of a jail facility and the programming associated with it. So that's my pitch, and don't mean to be long-winded, but I just want to make sure that you all understood where I'm coming from. Any other thoughts, Courtney?
Hey, Dan. I just speaking for myself, not for our whole office, but one thing that I want to share that I've heard a lot of feedback on in the community is that from clients, their families, and all the people that we work with through the public defender's office is that in Bellingham we are approaching a shift where there is a rift between the community about where we put our money and the programs we invest in. And we need more behavioral health care providers. There are folks that do not agree with some of the places that the money is being put. And then there are folks that do agree with it. And so I think what we're seeing is the narrative changing about where we want to see those dollars end up in the programs that develop from them, and the type of staffing capacity that we're actually seeing in these programs once they roll out. Because I know on my end, we could definitely use more behavioral health folks in the jail. I don't know how much a building will help. It would help with some, but I think we need more than, I think the question is larger than a new facility.
Can I respond, Courtney? Yeah, I totally agree. And I think that needs to be very clear to voters who are ultimately the decision makers when it comes to this, because they have to agree to fund the dollars that would go into a facility. It is not, to me, just a facility. It is MAT. It is behavioral health investments. It's navigation. It's warm handoffs for reentry. It's prevention. For people to not go into jail. We're going to get to this in a second, but on the sequential intercept model, we added the number 0. So pre-arrest. And I think those that kind of global thinking needs to happen, because it's not just a box that we put people in for 14 days or whatever the amount of time is. It can be a place where there are services provided, and before and after that kind of continuum needs to be in place. Otherwise, we're going to just do arrest, arraign, incarcerate, repeat over and over again. It doesn't work. We know that system is broken. And I'll stop pontificating, Stephen Gockley.
And I agree, just real quick, I totally
Sure,
agree
go
with you, Dan, and not to imply that you thought it was just a facility thing, just saying, I think that's the language that we're hearing in the community is, oh, it's just a facility. Oh, it's just this. And I agree with you. It's so much, it's much more than just a building.
Yeah.
And we have to find a way to explain that to everybody in different ways.
I totally get it. I mean, so as someone who was one of the co-founders of Grace, one of the co-founders of LEAD, I'm the person that initiated the ART, the alternate response team. I'm deeply invested in all of those types of responses, because they have a track record of working. Grace has a 95% reduction in jail days. Numbers don't lie. So, all right, sorry. Good, Courtney? Yep, okay. All right, Stephen?
Yeah, I just want to piggyback on Courtney's concern, because and Dan is absolutely right in thinking out ahead and how this will be presented to the voters when there's something on the ballot. But even from the first meeting of the Stakeholder Advisory Committee, it's clear that within the committee, there's a shorthand gaining some momentum to think of it as jail planning. When I think the jail is the smaller part of what we're doing. We're trying to build services around a minimum size jail, because we do need a decent place to incarcerate the small number of people that have to be incarcerated. So it's within that stakeholder group that we're trying to have the planning discussion in, that there needs to be that level of education that Courtney was pointing to and Dan was affirming. And so that's the kind of thing that this committee and its interaction with stakeholder committee members can be really valuable in. And the reason I raised my hand in the first place was just to acknowledge that as this group tries to educate the people who come in from the Stakeholder Advisory Committee, I just want to acknowledge that part of the water that we're swimming in now is the intersection, the overlap, sort of the blurring of the line between behavioral health and law enforcement and the criminal legal system. We see, after a couple of years of mucking around in this stuff, that they can't operate independently and be effective in the ways that we as a community want them to be. I don't think that understanding exists yet within the Stakeholder Advisory Committee. So when we talk about the kind of thing Perry just presented on, we see the integration of behavioral health services and criminal legal responses. But the people of the Stakeholder Advisory Committee will not see that unless we help them understand that you can't do one without the other. And so I hope that's a big part of our message as we try to bring them up to speed. And Dan's absolutely right that in many ways this is an unrealistic time frame. It's a very steep hill to climb in terms of educating the people who will be making recommendations and then the people who will be deciding on those recommendations. But at least at the moment, it is what we have. So it's up to us to make the best of it.
Thanks, Stephen. Doug Chadwick. You're muted, sir.
And I've said this multiple times on here with this group and others I've been in, there is a lack of behavioral health services in this community. And it's certainly a frustration from law enforcement's perspective when we try and pull on these resources and divert, and there's just not enough capacity. So that's certainly something that needs to, both mental health and substance use disorder, that needs to increase. And I know there's work, but that's not something that happens overnight. You have to develop that workforce, and that takes time. With that said, the other thing and kind of Stephen said the same thing. I think I've seen a shift in this community, and even within this committee, there used to be it was either you were in support of behavioral health or you were in support of law enforcement. But I think everybody realizes it is a symbiotic relationship. You can't you need law enforcement and behavioral health professionals working together to really get the services to the people and get the right services to the people. So that's something that we worked on. That's why I certainly advocate for that co-responder model, especially for the the more unincorporated portions of Whatcom County, because I just have concerns about putting mental health and behavioral health folks out there by themselves, because those are rapidly evolving situations, and we want to make sure that they're safe, but that people get the services that they need where they're at. As far as the facility, that's been obviously debated in this community for years, and the need hasn't gone away. But again, what I've seen with this committee, even over the last year, is that understanding that, and I think COVID really highlighted the limitations of the facility we have. Is, we have to have the space to keep people social distance and safe from some kind of infection within the facility, but also we have to have the space to have the various a medical wing, a behavioral health wing, certain areas where in the facility where people can be separated and get the help that they need if they have to be in that facility. And then Arlene asked this question years ago: why aren't we doing more educational programs? The simple truth is we don't have the space to do that. We're literally using every closet we have and every cubby hole we have to try and provide some of that. So, hopefully a new facility that has the space to, Dan's right. We are seeing increases in crime within our communities, and some people, it's just not safe for them to be out, diverted. And if they find themselves in this facility, we have to have a safe and constitutional facility to house them in, so that we can do our job and that our employees can operate in a safe environment as well. So I know that's frustrating people, the booking restrictions when people are not held accountable for victimizing other people. So there's a lot of pieces here, the public safety, but also a facility that meets the behavioral health needs of those that need to be there. And then hopefully we can add some of those educational and vocational programs as well.
Thanks, Doug. Arlene.
I mean, can you hear me?
Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah. My support for a new jail is dependent on a very robust mental health and social service system that we've been studying all these past years. And this is our opportunity to get as much of that as possible. This is a very expensive project, probably would be one of the biggest things this county has ever done. So if we're going to do it, we need to do it correctly, because we're not going to be able to do it 3 more times. So the informing of the planning is, it's crucial. And we've just spent all this time listening to people tell us what it is that they lack and what they need, and especially regarding preparation of people to be restored to society after they leave the jail. We know what those things are. We know it's housing. We know it's education. The providers have lines of people waiting to get these services in the jail. So there's not enough of everything. So we need sufficient staffing for all those things. And also job placement. It's very crucial for restoration, for people to get a job. And that's doable. It can be done. There are cooperative businesses all around here. So this is very hopeful, but we have to work really hard to make sure that the planners understand exactly what's needed.
Thanks, Arlene. Perry.
And one of the things that I can share from my past career, I was the state director for Spectrum Health Systems, which was charged with the responsibility of providing treatment services to individuals that were incarcerated with Department of Corrections. And a lot of times the belief system was, well, you know, those individuals are just doing that because they're incarcerated. Their motivation is sort of, you know, not intrinsic, but it's extrinsic. And I don't know if Michael will agree with me. I'm sure he's experienced some of this as well. But I found that individuals oftentimes would enter programs with an extrinsic motivation. But once they were involved in the programs, that process changed. And all I looked for as a clinician and as a clinical supervisor was the opportunity to work with the individuals and then begin to shift that thought process and understanding and belief system for them. And we tracked it, you know, very closely relative to recidivism. Don't know if folks are aware, but I haven't looked in a while, but recidivism rate for individuals that were incarcerated with the Department of Corrections in the state of Washington was somewhere in the region of 66%. Within a 3-year period of time, we're going to return to prison. And so we were able to track individuals that were involved in programs, first of all, for just skills and knowledge, and then also obviously reentry processes. And we were able to reduce that recidivism for the individuals that were involved in the programming that we were providing by about 50%. It was pretty phenomenal work. And so I think that's something that we really, you know, do need to take a look at. And I very much agree with the previous statements in regard to we need to be able to provide the services and have a great opportunity to do that while an individual is actually incarcerated, if that's going to be necessary. And we know that for some individuals it is. That doesn't preclude them from being successful in terms of developed abilities in recovery.
Michael Smith.
Yeah, what I'm hearing is good stuff, man. I mean, yeah, I think it's definitely needed in the county to have a facility that actually offers, you know, a gambit of services, a kaleidoscope of the services that are needed that will affect these individuals while they're in treatment or while they're incarcerated, and assist them kind of with warm handoffs when they return to the community. However, I just had a question about the current jail situation. I mean, I know there's, you know, mental health court. I know there's, you know, drug court. I know there's counselors. I know there's behavioral health folks working in the jail. I guess I want to say with the current population that is incarcerated, but I really mean with the population that's incarcerated. I mean, it's one thing to work with those people and then to really work with those people. Because when you're incarcerated, all the staff that come, you know, in and out of the pods to come see you are just doing their job. And inmates or convicts see them as one of them, you know, one of the correctional staff. And when you're incarcerated, that type of mind, those folks are your enemies. You're gonna tell them whatever you need to tell them to get out, to, you know, to do whatever it is that you need to do to get out. And talking about internal, external motivation, my question was, knowing that that is a mindset, probably the majority of the mindset of individuals that are locked up or incarcerated, they want to see people that are like them, right? Who they can say, hey, you know, okay, you understand, right? You get it, that, you know, we don't talk to them, and that's kind of considered snitching, even if you just go talk to these people, you know, talking about us, staff, right? You go talk to these people, you get, when you're in a pod, you kind of get looked at as, you know, why are they calling you out there? You know what I mean? So they get this when they come back in the pod. The people are questioning them like, you know, what's your loyalty to being a convict or an inmate? Is that person going to snitch on what we have going on in the pod? I mean, because there's drugs in the pod, you know, there's gang members, or there's different hierarchies in these pods inside of the county jails. So people are probably resistant to actually getting that help based on how it would make them look inside with their peers, right? So that would lead to my other piece, like how many real, you know, peer navigators peer counselors or recovery coaches are actually like the, the inmates or the population that they're serving are actually working with them, because that's probably going to have a larger impact than, staff like mental health counselors or, the LEAD program or the the GRACE program or any of those programs. They're going to look at those people as kind of like the enemy, right? And I think that peer and recovery coaches or navigators being in the pods with the individuals while they're in there would put a better frequency, be able to take a better temperature of what people really need. Not like a plant, not like what they would consider to be a snitch, but somebody that would actually be there with them and help them in the times that they need, instead of somebody coming to the window saying, we want to speak to so-and-so. You're going to get pushback internally. The person doesn't really want to help unless they're mentally ill, and it's just kind of like, I'm going to go along with the flow. But those that are cognitive enough to be able to, kind of put pressure on the other folks, they're going to be resistant to treatment. They're going to be resistant to that side. And I think just, having peers or recovery coaches in there probably would help a lot better.
I sense that Courtney wants to respond to that.
Yeah, I would love to. I just want to jump in here and say that, Michael, you're absolutely right in some aspects. I would also say that several of my clients, it's the opposite. They are seeing that other people in the pod are seeing, hey, he's getting phone calls. Hey, his attorney's actually calling him. Hey, he's getting services. And what you're seeing is, I've seen the opposite, where people are like more willing to work with providers because they're seeing their cellmates get assistance. But then you have the other end of the spectrum where you've got folks who, you're right, they see service providers and they're like, I don't trust them. I don't want to work with them, so you're absolutely right. I just don't want us to lose sight that, like any health condition, diabetes, mental health, it depends on the person. If I'm taking insulin and you're taking insulin, the picture is going to look vastly different. And I don't want us to start painting folks with a broad brush just because they're incarcerated and they have mental health issues. So many of them want services. So many of them are motivated to get help. They're overwhelmed, they're disoriented, they're tired, and they don't trust any of us. And you're absolutely right that that's where peers are essential. And when we bring in peers, we have to treat them as actual members of our team, not on a different tier, which you do see that in some programs. And yeah, I mean, you're totally right. But I think we also need to remember that a lot of people are in jail and they definitely want those services. And they're seeing other people get assistance and they're like, hey, I want that. It's not necessarily, hey, there's a guy in a button up, I don't want to talk to him.
Before I call on Brian, I just, as an SAC member, this is really valuable information to bring back, that the peer, I think it's an and equation, like many of the things within our discussions, it's seldom an either or, it's almost always an and. So yeah, we need grace and lead, and we need peer support. We've got to have trust it's a real, it's a condition of being a human being. If you don't trust people, how is that going to work? So I will definitely bring this forward. I want to learn a little bit more about peer support and what that looks like. So I might be calling on or emailing individually to just get a little bit more information. And Courtney, did you just want to respond to what's being said here in this discussion before I call on Brian?
I was just going to say, I would argue that we need peer more than we need lead. Not a or either or situation, but an and but situation. I think we need to start shifting our focus to peer oriented community investment. And then maybe the community will start to trust the supports that are being put in place.
Okay. I mean, it's a huge hole in our community. We just don't have that. It's been, I don't want to go into it. It's been mismanaged. I'll just put it that way. Ryan.
Yeah, I just wanted to say, related to a number of comments related to the facility, is to me, we're really reinventing criminal justice in the county. And the issue is who should be in jail and for how long. And then, oh yeah, it involves building a new facility. I just think the way that they frame this whole thing is extremely important. And just as a question, is Vera completely done? Are they going to do any additional work before this ballot measure is rolled out?
The Vera Institute,
Yeah,
that work's been completed.
because I thought there was one more piece that was supposed to be done before they put the last jail ballot measure in front of the people, in front of the voters.
But I don't know that. Stephen Gockley, do you know the answer to that question?
No, they had a time limited contract that had a list of tasks assigned to it, and they completed that. That's
I
done.
would just suggest that some of that work is going to be key to selling this, and maybe they want to revisit that for like an update or something, because that to me, a lot of the information in there is how you're going to successfully sell this to voters. That's just a comment.
Agreed.
Duly noted. Okay, anything else on this item? All right, well, the next item is a pretty good segue, and that is the sequential intercept model. This is the tool that we use to provide where on the continuum we have intercepts. And so new folks and old folks, I just want to just go over this so we're all on the same page. There's gonna be 3 pages of this that Jill's gonna go through. We're gonna start with the one where we have programs in place. So intercept 0 is community services. Number 1 is law enforcement. Number 2 is initial detention and initial court hearings. 3 is jails and courts. 4 is reentry. And 5 is post-incarceration community supports. So I'm not going to read all of the text underneath it, but you can see kind of how we've organized these programs and these services. So I'm just going to do 1 or 2 from each one. So community paramedic is intercept 0 is a community service. You don't even have to have law enforcement contact. Whatcom Dispute Resolution Center, their youth restorative practices and justice services, conflict resolution training. Again, you know, it's kind of preventing people from getting into the system. I remember talking to a public defender, and she said that the one of the largest determinants of a person's path in their life is their first day in court. And so if we can, because it becomes normalized, and so if we can prevent that from happening, we're just better off. It's also the hardest thing, in my opinion, to measure. So intercept 1, law enforcement crisis intervention team training, crisis stabilization facility. And you'll see the ones in blue are the relatively new ones there. So GRACE program and LEAD would be kind of that intercept 1 model. And then 2 is mental health screening, Muni Court, SCRAM, pretrial GPS. SCRAM's the alcohol bracelet that we give to defendants. EHM is electronic home monitoring. Pretrial risk assessment, semi-controversial depending on who you talk to, but that is a tool that we use to determine whether a person needs to be incarcerated pretrial, or if they can be on SCRAM or EHM, or just PR'd, personal recognizance. And then 3 is jails and courts. And so we've got like examples would be like DUI impact panel, work and school release, in custody work crew, and then the specialized courts that were brought up earlier, drug, mental health, family, teen, etc. Not quite sure how those calendars are working out. Courtney, I'm going to call on you in a minute here to maybe update us a little bit on that one. And then homeless outreach team is under that one too. Intercept 4, short-term housing for stabilization, reentry, or health department reentry program. And then GRACE, GRACE shows up throughout this, you'll notice, because it does touch on various parts in the continuum. Intercept 5, post-incarceration, community supports, specialized behavioral health program, again, GRACE program, DRC, adult resolution training, skill building, and then all of the other ones you see in there. So that's what we have in current inventory. So we're doing pretty good. Perry and I, and previously Ann and Barry Buchanan, Councilmember Buchanan, and myself have served on national peer learning networks. So we get to work with other communities, and I can tell you with confidence that we are far ahead of pretty much every other community that we've worked with in terms of our inventory. We still have work to do. And so, Jill, if you can scroll down to the next page, we can take a look at where some of that work is. These are programs in place with resource shortages. It's like we have the capacity here, but we don't have the full capacity. So employment, Arlene brought this up, employment resources, including second chance employers. I think that's key. For a person to stay out, they have to have employment. They've got to have a source of income. So that is key. We just don't have enough of it. Community outreach, under one, community outreach and recovery support, or CORES, funding CSF beds for non-medical individuals, especially 12-hour holds. There's a gap there. Under two, initial detention, initial court hearings, Superior Court pretrial services unit. There's gaps there. Intercept 3, jails and courts. Jail medication assisted therapy program. I want to hear from Doug on that one a little bit more. Housing lab in jail, things that are hard to come by through space, lack of space, and other reasons. Intercept 4, reentry, jail reentry services from contracted jail service agencies, employment resources, including, again, it goes back to the have to have a job. Improved pathway for voluntary removal of protection orders, DVSAS services, and then under Intercept 5, 24/7 staff permanent supportive housing, clean and sober housing, community SUD treatment. Hey, Doug, before we go on, Doug, can you just touch on a little bit with the MAT and the housing lab in the jail?
Sure. We have a new medical staff here, a new physician, and who is experienced with medically assisted treatment. So that program, I believe, went from less than 10 to over 50 within about 2 weeks. So that's a lot of people. So that has obviously tapped our medical staff and trying to, and just because of the facility limitations we have, we're having to provide those services in 2 different locations. So that is certainly a challenge. And I think I mentioned Vivitrol is an option for people on their way out to the door, but that is not something, and Michael probably knows more about this than I, that's not something that people apparently necessarily want on board when they're heading out the door. So, but it is available and it is an option for folks. But that program, again, has expanded significantly within the last month.
Wow. Okay. Thanks for that.
Dan,
Yeah,
I can touch really quick on the housing lab because that's an Opportunity Council partnership. So
sure.
Before COVID, we were able to put housing resources, essentially a case manager who would help somebody be thinking about their housing options before leaving jail. It was started in kind of addressing some of the gaps that Arlene talks about, not infrequently, right? That there just are not services to help people transition. And obviously with COVID restrictions, we couldn't, and we've had staffing issues as well. But something of that nature, whether it's housing lab in a new facility, whether that's done by outside people, but a genuine focus on housing to try to avert some of the homelessness that happens when people get out of jail, I would just like to strongly advocate for. And so if it's that housing lab, which is very open source, come as you are, work on what you got type of situation, or something even more robust, I think would be a critical element in a new facility.
Thanks, Mike. Hey, while we're pausing here real quick, Courtney, can you enlighten us a little bit on, what you know about court calendars, especially with the therapeutic courts?
So to my knowledge, the mental health court is operating as it would. I mean, we meet virtually on Wednesdays. Some participants are able to attend in the actual physical courtroom, but right now with COVID, most are attending virtually. I pulled up, I've got the 28th administrative order from our Superior Court. I think the only update I've got on that end is just that we're probably only going to be doing 1 trial a week. That's about all I have.
Okay. So that's it's impacted via pandemic. Is that what's going on?
Yeah, everything's completely slowed down, and they're taking it slow with having too many bodies physically present in the courthouse.
Okay. What's that old adage? May you live in interesting times. I think that we're there with all the intersections of everything. So okay, thanks for that, Courtney. Appreciate it. Jill, if you
Yeah,
can
I wish I had more to offer, but in my role, there's a lot of that I only find out about after the fact, which when you guys find out. So
okay, no worries on that. Jill, can you go? There you go. Okay. So again, so the three layers of, what we have, but we need more, and then this is what we don't have. So you can see it's a fairly short list, thank goodness. But it's not, but it's, they're huge. Some of these pieces are huge. Eliminate criminalization of homelessness. That is a whole body of work that, could be a lifetime of work. Under Intercept 0, seamless protocols for the crisis stabilization facility discharge treatment plan. That's kind of came up before in the one above. Dedicated DCR for police and sheriff's office. Intercept 2 looks like we're doing pretty well there. Intercept 3, offender treatment for domestic violence. This is something that was one of the main reasons I joined the DB SAS board about 3-4 years ago, was to try to get that going, and it just did not happen through that agency. I think that's one that I am really focused on, is to try to figure that piece out. Young adult reduced incarceration. That's some of the body of work that Perry and myself and the others that do the national work. That's part of that, or that's a main focus of it. That's under jails and courts, and then court processing case workload efficiency improvements. Bridget Collins, Family Support Services. Jen Lockwood, I hope that she joins this group. She's the associate director of that agency, and I'm hoping that she can kind of help us know where the gaps are. Mike, Mike, you have a problem? Do you have a problem? We all have problems. Do you have a question? Sorry.
I didn't mean to interrupt your flow, Dan. I know you were nearing the end. I can hold to the end.
Okay,
what I was gonna ask is, we've heard from a couple of folks about what they're hearing about from the community about what they would want to see in a new facility. And I guess I'm thinking about how this integrates into SAC, into education of members, and all of those pieces. And I know you'll touch on that. I guess as I was looking at these things and reflecting upon them, and you see literally there's a spot in there out of these intercepts, there's one spot for the jail. So hopefully this is showing people the context that there's a whole lot of other pieces that wrap around the actual construction of a jail that this group cares about, right? That Whatcom County cares about, that our legislators care about. And I'm curious to those that brought forth some of that feedback, which I think is really useful to hear about what are the listening sessions telling us. People are suspicious maybe of one part, but not of the other. Does something like this help illustrate that it is within context, that we don't move forward, hopefully, that we don't end up moving forward something that is only jail and doesn't deal with behavioral health? What I see here is a really robust and multifaceted piece. And I guess for those people, and Courtney, you had some great information. Arlene, you brought some stuff. Brian brought some stuff. Many of you brought forth, here's what I'm hearing. Michael Smith, I know too, brought forth from the community. Does a tool like this, or does like a perspective like this, does that help make that case? Does that help explain it? Or is this just too wonky? Is it too, and so I'm curious about what y'all think, because I think this is one of our tools, but I want to know if from your experience, if this would even be effective. That's my question.
Thanks, Mike. That's a good framework for discussion. I saw Arlene's hand went up, and then Courtney. Arlene, you're muted.
My initial response to looking at this way of explaining things is to feel overwhelmed. And I'm a professional. So what would a person who's just an ordinary reader do in the face of the Intercept descriptions? So I don't have a solution for you about how to rework it, and I don't want to reinvent the wheel either, but I trust that reaction, and I want people to be able to understand what is in the plans and what is needed, but it needs to be brought forward in a simple, clear way. And I know there are people who are good at that, but this is very professional jargon description that we all understand. But still, I had to chain myself to the table to read it. And I'm joking, but I'm serious at the same time. So so thinking caps about that, how to present this. And all the time that we talk about it, I'm thinking about who needs to know this information. Because that's been one of the gaps that we've bumped into a number of times in our work, is that all these things exist, and it's really good that it exists. But, as a provider, I never knew that it existed. Nobody ever gave me a brochure with a list of contacts and programs that would be simple to read and call on when I had a client to work with. So that's the piece that I'm expecting and hoping will definitely be in place. Maybe that refers back to somebody was talking about informatics. That's a piece that is really important. The informing of providers, organizations, and the general public to know that they can access this kind of help.
Thanks, Arlene. Hey, Jill, you can take that down now. I think that we kind of get the gist of it. And then Courtney, go ahead.
Just to echo what Arlene said, I mean, when I see the SIM, I'm a qualitative data person. I love it. I want to read it, but it's not accessible for everybody. And I think the meetings that we're having right now, a lot of discussion about action. Communities disengage quickly when they hear that. We all on this panel know that none of these things happen overnight, that change takes time, and that these holes that we're in systemically took decades to form. But the people that we're talking about right now, they don't have that time. They're navigating their lives in survival mode and waiting for change. And so I think what would happen, what would be helpful, is if we reframed the information so that it's accessible not for people like us who are trying to figure out how to coordinate the moving pieces to make these things happen, but how to actually present that information to the people who are using those portions of the Intercept and how that plays out in their lives. Because the way they're going to interact with that Intercept is going to be vastly different than how it would look on my end as a provider. And I say that not to say reinvent the whole wheel in the chart, because I know that chart's been out there for a while, and Whatcom County's built on it quite a bit compared to other counties I've worked with that are using the SIM. But again, this is always the hurdle that I've seen we would hit, whether it's Bellingham, whether it's Spokane, whether it was St. Louis. We would get to this point where it was we have all this information and we know what we want to do with it. But then when it came to communicating it to stakeholders and making it digestible for the community and actually usable and tangible, that's where we kind of fell flat. And so, yeah, I think we're at that point where we're trying to figure out how to do that.
Dan, I know you're going to call on Brian here in a moment. Courtney, that was extremely helpful. And I know Stephen had to leave early and sent his apologies beforehand, but as co-chair of the group, and we've been working on a communication consultant and an RFP for a communication consultant. If you remember, we came to you all and asked, hey, what are some of the key things that this consultant can work on? And I think, Courtney, your comments just make me think this is one of those things, because this contains, as Arlene has reminded us, much of the good work that has happened, many of the things that have been added that we track. But if we can't make it palatable, make that information that it's not so wonky looking, then that will be kind of lost. So I would just like to advocate, we'll be surely to share with Stephen that I think maybe some of the first work of the communication consultant that's talking about the wins anyways, or things that we've done well in the community, could be, how do we take the information that's in the sim and make this something that somebody can actually use? Thank you for the aside. And Brian, on to you.
Why don't you make Courtney and Arlene have to work with the communications consultant and give some feedback? Give him some feedback.
If you all would be willing, I'm sure there's going to be space in there in some way, shape, and form that would be valuable.
I'm willing as my capacity allows.
Good, Brian.
Yeah, I would just say, Frameworks Institute has done a number of focus groups and studies on communicating about criminal justice issues. And so I think some of their work might be helpful. And I'd be happy to talk with a consultant about that. They may be familiar with that. But I just think for high information voters and community influentials, that portions of that chart could be useful. For moderate to low information voters, I think you're going back to things like who should be in jail and why and for how long, and how do we prevent people from just recycling through that system. I mean, just keeping it very simple. Even something like NAMI uses, like help not handcuffs, is a frame for some of what this group is about and what initiative is about, would be helpful. But I think communicating this is an extremely challenging process, and a lot of this work that this group does and the way they communicate these things is not useful for many voters. They just can't grasp it. So that's all I'll say.
I'll just add on to that real quick, and just recognizing that we're running out of time. We've got another agenda item. This is not what we would mail to the voters. So I've done political campaigns in this county since 2001. I've done them at every level, from state senate to school board and everything in between, including a ballot measure that was successful twice for housing. And we would never send out data. Is not the answer. Data should be next to you and ready, but data is not the message. The message is kind of what Brian was saying. It's got to be simple. I mean, look at the thing that happened on January 6th last year, Stop the Steal. 3 words, and it's just an idea. It's a concept. And I'm not saying that we would use those words, but it would be something very, very simple. What you just saw was an internal document. I mean, it's public, but it is used internally for us to help frame and understand where our deficiencies are at and where we're actually doing stuff. And so I just wanted to, as professionals, I want you to have that information and to be able to have it at your fingertips, but it's not what we're going to talk to voters about. We're going to have to come up with something. The communications people, the marketing people, they will figure that out, and with our input. Does that make sense? Okay. All right. Anything else on this one? We've just got a few minutes left here, and we have a meeting coming up with a joint meeting with the legal and justice systems folks. We do this 4 times per year, and I find these meetings to be super valuable in terms of the overlap between legal and justice and behavioral health. There's a tremendous amount of overlap. What I'm asking for here is additional items from you that we can have for discussion at that meeting. There's been a rough outline. Jill, can you put that up real quick?
Yeah, I can share that. Give me a moment.
Yeah, okay. Well, she's working on that. Just be thinking about, if you had your magic wand in your wish list, what those things can look like, recognizing that we are going to be limited on time, and we have these discussion pieces coming up. For newer members, this is a bit of a continuation from our last joint meeting, which I forget when we had it, November, December, somewhere back there. And we were focusing in on the latter part of the sequential intercept model, mid to latter part of it, on reentry services, and we're talking about involuntary treatment, competency restoration, other components. So I kind of want to keep it in that wheelhouse if we can, so we can really round out that discussion. And then we can figure out for the next meeting what we want to, it might be a different body of work. It might be more on the, part 0 or preceding that. So given that we kind of, sprung this on you a little bit here, if you've got ideas, now's the time to bring them up. And Jill, that is the totality of what has been suggested so far.
Yes.
Okay, there's nothing above on. Okay, Courtney, go ahead.
You already mentioned restoration, but that would be the bullet point that I would want to add, is just more conversation around, like the big picture dream would be that we would have, less people that are incarcerated for things that are not public safety concerns, but yet they are caught in a cycle of restoration and incarceration for months, if not years. And we all know that the state hospitals are completely overwhelmed. We don't have enough beds, and we've got folks lined up out the door waiting for restoration bed dates. Whatcom County the state tentatively set Whatcom County as part of phase 3 for outpatient restoration. But now I've read online that they are reconsidering what counties will be considered in phase 3. So I'm just wanting to add to this list. My hope is that Whatcom County will still be considered as a county that's receiving outpatient restoration, to try to fill some of that service gap with the need for more restoration services, because that is part of the cycling that we're seeing, is the competency restoration process. That is a big moving part in all of this, and is likely affecting a majority of the cases that we're seeing with people that are going through these systems multiple times. I guarantee 8 out of 10 of those folks have had at least one restoration cycle.
Okay. Jill, did you capture that?
Yes.
Okay. I would say add a bullet point under item 2 to try to encapsulate what Courtney just said in terms of, it's so frustrating. All the county jails are feeding their people into Western State on this side, and on Eastern State on the other side. And I know that they switch back and forth, but that's a huge piece for me as well. And I want to have a pretty broad discussion on it. Thanks, Courtney, for that. And others.
I would just highlight, and Jill, make sure that that's in there too. It seems like there's a little bit of a lever in there. And I was gleaning, Courtney, from your comments that there's something at risk here. And what's at risk is being bumped out of a phase 3, if I'm understanding correctly. So I'd like to hear more about that at that meeting, because if there's a lever to push, maybe the IPRTF can be part of that.
And that's what I'm wondering. I'm not sure if it's a lever or if the lever even exists. I just saw that on OFFM's, the Office of Forensic Mental Health's website, they had changed some of the language around counties that were being considered. And I noticed that Whatcom wasn't specified anymore. So I'm just wondering if there's a button we can push for that.
And I really hope Chief Jones will be able to, she was not able to attend our previous meeting, and we went ahead and started the conversation, but we really can't finish it. We really need Chief Jones to help us understand what that's actually like and how challenging that is, because I hopefully it will motivate us to really, whether it's a lever, as Courtney said, or something different, we need to push for that.
I'd like to add that in, to have Chief Jones as a presenter on here, Jill, to discuss the current situation with as it relates to having people go to Western State, and also mental health illness as it's represented within the Whatcom County Jail, like what percentage, what chief is seeing, if we can add that in as a, I don't know where it fits.
Yeah, and also just to remind you that Raylene King is inviting the state officials to this joint meeting, and they've confirmed that they will be attending to
Okay.
provide more information and updates as well.
Okay. I don't know how we do this, but I want the SAC members to be at this meeting, as many as possible. Jill, I don't know if you can send an invite out to that group.
Yes, we can work on that.
Okay, thank you. Okay, anything else? Okay, one piece that I just want to let the group know, I'm meeting with Congressman Rick Larson this afternoon to discuss Medicaid reimbursement increases, also seeing what can be done at the federal level to increase capacity from 16-bed facilities to something maybe a little bit bigger. I don't know what that number is, but I want to have that discussion with him, begin that conversation. And so that I just want to let the group know that there's work outside this committee that is being done sort of pursuant to what we're talking about today. Jill, you can go ahead and take that down. We're at time right now. Do we have any members of the public that are with us today that want to speak to the group?
No, there are no attendees at today's meeting. And Mike Kelly, if you have a minute to stay after, I would appreciate it. Thank you.
Okay. Any other items for the good of the order today?
I just have one. Doug, please pass along to everybody inside the sheriff's office, our continued well wishes for those deputies who are still receiving care, and our heart goes out to them.
I appreciate that. And a lot of people, some of you on this meeting have reached out and expressed your concern and thoughts for the deputies. So we certainly appreciate that. We've got widespread support across the community and really from around the state. People have been very gracious, and we certainly appreciate that. And I know those deputies are feeling that support as well. And that goes a long ways towards their recovery. So thank you.
Yeah, Doug, I would say to extend that from this entire group. And if we have to make a motion to do that, I will do that. If not, I just would want to get head nods that everyone's okay with saying that this group is extending those thoughts and prayers in whatever way that you want to say that. Okay, great. All right, well, like I said, we're at time. Thanks for staying a couple minutes extra today, and we will see you in March for the joint meeting. Have a good rest of your day.